Welcome back, everyone. This is Ryan Selkis at 2-Bit Idiot with another episode of Masari's Unqualified Opinions. Very excited for one of the first episodes of the new year to have Zaki Manian, the Director of Research at Tendermint. We're going to talk a bit about Cosmos, IBC, the game of stakes, and maybe Game of Thrones when it comes to quote-unquote Ethereum killers. There's quite a bit to cover. Cosmos, certainly one of the most exciting projects in the industry right now, has had a phenomenal run since the initial fundraising and creation in 2017. Really, the project dates back a bit further than that. But it is one of the teams that's been most active, I'd say, in shipping updates and really solving this interoperability problem between blockchains. And I know Zaki is going to say, well, we're doing much more than just that. So I'll give him a chance to speak. But for starters, Zaki, we always start off by asking about the backstory of the person involved, right? So exactly how did you get into crypto? Was it Bitcoin first? Was it Ether first? Or what helped you fall down the rabbit hole and get us to the point where we're sitting across from each other today?
Yeah, so I'll do the fast version of the story. So before blockchains, I was doing something completely different. I was building medical devices. So software, firmware, optics, lasers, proteins, that kind of stuff. And I had this moment of insight, which was, the software I write is terrible. But the software that is running the world, is like increasingly running the world, is written by people who are as good as or worse than me. And like that sort of moment of insight was, okay, this is going to be a problem. And so then it was, how do we figure out, where do I redirect my career to kind of catch what it seems like that bullet head on, essentially. And so I just kind of saw that that was where the puck was going. And I started getting more interested in cryptography, distributed systems, formal verification, all of that stuff. I got interested in sort of government surveillance and privacy. I started spending more time with people who were involved in things like the Signal project. And Matt Corello was a contributor to the Signal project at the time. And I was like, what is this Bitcoin thing that you work on? And so he started explaining how Bitcoin sort of worked to me. I got pretty intrigued with it. At the same time, I was building my knowledge of cryptography, distributed systems. I met Jay Kwan, who's the founder of Tendermint, around the same time. This is 2013, right around the time when the first, the Mt. Gox era Bitcoin bubble happened. And at the time, it took me a long time actually to come around on cryptocurrencies. I thought the technology is really interesting. I want to work in this space. So I started an enterprise blockchain company called SkuChain. Explored the enterprise blockchain space for a while, was involved in did projects for Wells Fargo, et cetera. And
I never actually put that together. So we'd invested in SkuChain at Digital Currency Group, and I didn't realize.
Yeah. So I go way back with DCG. And then and the paths of Tendermint, SkuChain, Cosmos kept crossing each other. But at the same time, I was, so I didn't know anything about how money moving systems work. I knew how to invest as a retail investor. And I knew how to read a P&L before I started SkuChain. I didn't know how the back office of capital markets or money moving systems. But in order to sort of pursue this enterprise blockchain path, I had to learn all of that. And early 2017 was when I sort of had this the next insight, which was, okay, not to fully realize the value of this technology, the setting in which it makes the most sense is public blockchains. But I had this weird hobby, which is public blockchain scalability. So 2014, 2015, there was just this tiny group of people, Vitalik, Vlad, Dominic Williams, Jay, Ethan, who cared about this idea of if people wanted to use public blockchains, how would we actually build them at scale? How would we actually do useful things, have them operate at the scale of the global economy? And I was really frustrated with the approach that Ethereum, like Vitalik and Vlad, were taking in 2016, and I was really frustrated with the approach that Dfinity was taking in 2016. And so Jay, Ethan, and I were like sort of started to put a bunch of ideas that we'd all had together, and that turned into Cosmos. But it was so much more than a blockchain project is so much more than it's a regulatory compliance strategy. It's a community building strategy. It's a branding strategy. It's a technical strategy. And it's continued to be a very challenging environment to work in, to deliver make all of that stuff real, but we've made a lot of progress in 2019.
And you were in the earlier camp of ICOs. So this is end of 2016, beginning 2017, when this project was birthed and you were able to get the initial stakeholders in place.
So we tried really hard to do a better job on sort of regulatory compliance than even, let's say, Ethereum did.
So a couple of years later, so you couldn't hide as well either, right?
We couldn't hide as well, but we were also really we never anticipated we did not anticipate the ICO boom. What was the reality of the situation is that we wanted to build open source software. We thought the only value of this stuff is if it's open source, anyone can use it, anyone could build in it. That was a really tough thing in 2016 to get anyone to fund. And so we thought that a public fundraiser, building something like along the lines of like the Apache Software Foundation, et cetera, to build open source software was like a credible way of doing this. We made very clear there were no tokens issued during this, so it wasn't really like an ICO. And then when the software was at the point where it could sustain tokens, at least one instance of this blockchain exists that like has fundraiser-driven token distribution. That's the Cosmos Hub.
And this was, so there was about a 2-year lag between the two, right? So the initial fundraising took place in kind of Q1 of 2017, right before.
We were right after Gnosis.
Do you kind of wish you'd waited like 3 more months? It's crazy to me to think that if you and Tezos had just kind of transposed your funding dates, maybe you would have raised 10 times as much.
So,
I know that wasn't a goal, but
my general point of view was the more like my experience with all of this, and I'm very close to the Tezos people. I'm very close to I was involved in all of this stuff that happened in 2017. And my point of view was largely the more money you raised, the worse time you had it.
Yes.
Our goal was to really raise just the amount of money that we needed to execute on the project. We are fortunate to be in a position that we had more than enough runway, even though it took longer than it was expected to like sort of fully deliver on what the vision is. And unfortunately, we've like sort of managed things well to the point where we can now incubate this network through the resources that are available. But ultimately what we have built was an open system. The real driver is people finding useful stuff to do with the system and then hopefully feeding back and investing in the underlying technology.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what Cosmos is, right? So you're director of research at Tendermint. You complete this fundraise, and the 2 primary beneficiaries were Tendermint and another company, Agoric, who's working in collaboration on actually shipping some of the tech related to Cosmos, the network, and then this new intra-blockchain protocol.
I don't want to spend this entire conversation like going to the weeds of the organizational structure.
No, just to give people a map so that
the map you should have is prior to this year, there was just Tendermint, the company, which was a company that was founded all the way back in 2014. And Tendermint, the company, was focused on delivering the system. As we kind of got closer to launch and through the launch of the Cosmos Hub, the ecosystem has grown. We've participated in service agreements, grants, et cetera, with a significant number of entities. But one of the real privileges that we've had with the Agoric team is that, at least for me, a big inspiration in the Cosmos design was the earlier work of the Agoric team back in the 90s. I didn't know them at the time. Like I had this, like, was reading their work. Another friend had introduced me to their work and said, I think this stuff is like really where smart contracts should go. Nobody in the blockchain space seems to be aware of it or working on it. So I was like, okay, this sounds like a great idea. And this was like kind of what we were building. And then along the way, Zuko introduced me to the founders of Agoric. And I was like, well, I think that because we were inspired by your ideas, there's huge synergy here between what you want and what Cosmos wants. And that has mostly borne out in terms of like technical roadmap, et cetera.
Well, the reason I bring up the structure is not to get into the corporate minutia or
like what is the Swiss Foundation doing? What is the Delaware Corps, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, it is important though, because I think it speaks to the actual early steps that you took to decentralize the stakeholder group, which many people talk about, but they kind of say, okay, well, we as a company are going to create this blockchain and then we'll do it kind of gradually over time. Whereas you could say it was similar, but the having other kind of founding stakeholders around the table when the network launched was I'd say a pretty meaningful driver of the community ethos that seems to be more positive around Cosmos than other ETH killer this kind of bucket of branded protocols that some people are worried about or are fighting to steal share from Ethereum.
So far, like okay, so what our thesis was. Our thesis is that we release pieces of technology early that people can actually use to build things and use that feedback to like drive development of the system. Yep. No one else has followed this pattern at all. It continues to shock me given how successful we have been with this pattern. Like, release the consensus engine. There have never been significant private, GitHub repositories in the Cosmos Tendermint project. Everything has been open source. Everything we do is through GitHub. Our development process has always been extremely friendly to outside contributors. And mostly where the outside contributors come from is somebody builds either a big company or a startup company decides to start building on Cosmos and Tendermint and starts contributing to the project. Just because, it is easier when they all want different features. Now, this year has been challenging because we have, this enormous ecosystem participant in Binance. And we had not been able to sort of fully reconcile how to work together around it. But, it does mean that there is this huge developer team that is working on roughly the same stack.
So we want to take a step back. You can get very technical, and I can get a little bit technical, but we're going to try to keep it at 30,000 feet as much as possible.
Absolutely, just pull me back.
Yeah. So the primary innovation and what's really interesting about Cosmos, and I think the meme fits, so we'll use it, is this internet of blockchains, right? Yeah. The concept that there will be many different ledgers that are going to need to talk to each other in the future. Because these ledgers are not one size fits all. You might have kind of bespoke needs if you're an enterprise, if you're in a certain jurisdiction, if you're in a certain market.
So I'll just give you a really high level because this year was the proof. Like this year, again, unexpectedly, we got really the proof of this point of view, which was our point of view, which was how we are fundamentally different from Ethereum. Which was, we believed that any group of stakeholders will most likely end up wanting their own blockchain. And so the first sort of proof that we got of this was that Binance picked the Cosmos SDK Tendermint for the Binance DEX. They were like, they could have, built it on Ethereum. They could have, picked any number of other blockchains. And for the time, and like what they clearly signaled was, we want our own blockchain. We want to control. We want that level of control. But I think the Aragon project migrating to a Cosmos chain was again just like sort of all of these things are not business development wins. No one from Tendermint went and like met with CZ and was like convinced him to use the Cosmos SDK. Their technology teams surveyed the landscape, figured out what they needed and what would work for them. And frankly, it was a politically inconvenient choice for them and nevertheless did the thing. Aragon, same sort of deal. Nobody on our side ever really met with them. We built an Ethereum compatibility layer for the Cosmos SDK so that people could migrate their existing software. And Aragon was like, yeah, we love this. We got completely screwed over by the Istanbul upgrade, and we don't want to do that anymore. We see the advantage of the Aragon community having control over a blockchain and not living on top of Ethereum.
And because I want to pull back on the jargon or names that some people might be less familiar with. Most people within the ecosystem will know, Aragon governance system focused on decentralized autonomous organizations, which probably one of the big themes of the year. The Istanbul upgrade you're referring to, the hard fork of Ethereum, broke some of their smart contracts.
Yep.
And it kind of comes back to the ethos of Ethereum, which is more loose and move fast, break things. You could argue.
I would say, they made a credible technical choice. Ethereum said it is a security vulnerability that we're closing. No one had ever exploited this vulnerability. It had been there since the beginning. But their priorities, the priorities of the Ethereum developers, were not the priorities of the Aragon community, which perhaps would have preferred, their contracts work until someone exploits this vulnerability.
And this is important because it's backwards compatibility, right? So this is one of the areas that folks that criticize Ethereum actually have a fair point, and it kind of gives an opening to other competitive protocols. I'm not going to say that Cosmos is necessarily, exactly competitive versus complementary or not. Maybe we can touch on that a little bit later.
I'd say our the main difference between Cosmos and, let's say, the wider world of Ethereum killers is most of the wider world of Ethereum killers try to be Ethereum but better. We are simply different. If the market prefers the way Cosmos works and is architected, it's because the market prefers that different opinion. And I think, I've been friends with Vitalik for 5 years. He's always been a fan of Cosmos, and we sort of share that opinion. This is interesting because it is a completely different take on what blockchains are. One of us could be, maybe both coexist. Maybe one of us is right. We won't know for many years.
So we're kind of dancing around the core here, which is how exactly is Cosmos different, right? So at a super high level, you have this hub and zone model, which basically uses the Cosmos hub, as kind of the coordinating ledger, and then allows other projects, companies, stakeholder groups to port into that main hub with their own sub ledgers, sub blockchains.
The pieces that we built and are fully deployed and are powering projects like Aragon and Binance, et cetera, is this toolkit for building your own blockchain. The piece that, as director of research, I spent most of 2019 sort of working on, and we are deploying in 2020, is the inter-blockchain communication protocol. You can think of it as a fully built out vision of what, started with the Blockstream sidechains paper. And basically you have this toolkit, you can build your own blockchain. Once you built your own blockchain, well, it's really tough to invent money to power your blockchain. So where's money going to come from? Where are assets going to come from? And the reality is they're probably going to come from existing blockchains. So how do you get a network effect around that? And what IBC is a mechanism by which modules, smart contracts, et cetera, on different blockchains can actually start cooperating with each other, can start working together, where you can pull an asset from, let's say, the Cosmos hub, you can pull atoms, et cetera. You can use them for security. You can use them. You can use a fee token to power your gas model, et cetera. It allows an entrepreneur, a community, et cetera, to have a shared state machine, to have the power and the properties of a blockchain without having to create money. And that is, I think, the real power at a high level of what the Cosmos model is.
So let's talk about the 101 explanation for how this works, right? So you want to use Cosmos to make an Ethereum to Bitcoin transfer. right?
Sure.
So
that is like the most painful use case, but we'll go for it.
Yeah, let's just try to kind of help people understand the flows, even though we don't have a whiteboard here. So
maybe let's start with a little simpler use case, and then let's go to it. Just because I'm gonna otherwise throw so much jargon at people that they're not gonna.
Let's keep it simple and we'll leave it at that. We'll throw my example out. Let's do yours.
Let's start with. I'm on a DEX, let's say the Binance, I'm on a Binance DEX. There's liquidity there. I want to issue an asset. I want to distribute it to the community through the Binance DEX, or some other DEX, a DEX on the Cosmos Hub, etc. I'm making crypto kitties on my blockchain. And I want people to be able to trade those crypto kitties. And this is a common business problem. People are talking about gaming and collectibles, but how do you get liquidity? So if there are venues in the Cosmos network, blockchains that have a significant amount of liquidity, you just have to be able to bring your asset there. So right now there are trusted ways of doing that. There's an Oracle. You can have like an escrow. This is how the Binance. Well, I won't get too much into the weeds there, but you can basically say, in my blockchain, you have the IBC module. So you tell the IBC module, I want to lock up my CryptoKitty on, CryptoKitties, the CryptoKitty chain. I want to send it to the Cosmos Hub, and there people can exchange it for other assets, all the different assets that live on the Cosmos Hub. So they lock it up. They send an IBC packet that says this CryptoKitty is locked up, and you send it to the Cosmos Hub. The Cosmos Hub recognizes that packet. So, the Tendermint consensus algorithm came to consensus on I've locked up my CryptoKitty. It sends you a packet saying, I prove to you that I've locked up my CryptoKitty. And then it instantiates a CryptoKitty, a virtual CryptoKitty on the Cosmos Hub. Mm-hmm. And from there, people can trade it. People can move it from there onwards to, let's say, the Binance DEX, et cetera. You can take advantage of connections and trust relationships that the Cosmos Hub has with the wider ecosystem without having to bootstrap all of this yourself. And just like you have this compositional network effect between smart contracts on Ethereum, you get a compositional network effect between blockchains and Cosmos.
So just to be clear, though, they're basically new, atomized synthetic assets that are created, right? So you're not locking atoms on the other side of the equation.
No.
So where does the atom token come into this?
So the atom token is a couple of things. First and foremost, the atom is an experiment in permissionlessly running a system like this. So there are, permissioned Cosmos chains that already exist. The Binance system, anyone can use it, but only the Binance selects who the validators, operators of the network are. So Cosmos is an experiment in permissionlessness. The second thing that Cosmos is, the Atom token is an experiment in, is it is experiment in governance. It's an experiment in can you have decentralized sort of management of a system like this? Can it be available? Can it evolve? Can it do updates? We just finished the second upgrade that was sort of managed by this governance process. And now governance has control directly over all the economic parameters of the system. And then there's sort of the hypothetical future in this IBC-enabled world of what atoms what atoms are for. And what atoms are for is largely collateralizing the security of the ecosystem that exists around the Cosmos Hub. So rather than, for instance, having smart contracts on the Cosmos Hub, we imagine that you could spin up a zone that supports either the Agoric smart contract system or the EVM or Cadena's smart contract system or anything else that kind of comes up into existence. But you don't want to, if you just create a new staking token for it, the security around it would be weak. Mm-hmm. But what we're expecting and have prototyped and expect the hub to eventually adopt is protocols by which those atom tokens, which are right now slashable for misbehaviors on the hub, become slashable for misbehaviors across this entire ecosystem. And so the atom becomes the anchor of the permissionless universe in the Cosmos Hub, and sort of the interchange point between what we expect to see is a permissioned world and of various kinds and a permissionless world.
And in return for actually holding these and being part of the security model, there's an embedded inflation reward.
So there's an inflationary reward that was sort of designed to like bootstrap staking into existence. When we conceived of this whole system, we never imagined that a year in we would have 75% of all atoms staked. We started to have indications that this might be the case, but like the whole staking pickup was way faster than we ever anticipated. So now we're really transitioning between this sort of inflation-driven economic model and a transaction fee-driven or a rent-based economic model. And what atom holders are sort of charged with, in order for their atoms to be valuable, in order for them to be successful, they got to go find real sources of revenue, real cash flows that they can take a portion of and can be distributed to atom holders. And that is the job of the Cosmos Hub.
Now, has that been done yet? Has that transition been done yet, or is that
No, that is
as part of the IBC?
That is IBC sets up the ingredients for that, but product market fit there, no one knows.
Well, it's interesting because you say you're trying to solve for this interoperability between blockchains and different asset holding blockchains, I guess, for lack of a better term. But atoms really are valued as if they're a form of money right now.
I hope not.
Well, if you just look at the dollars and cents of it, I'm not saying the market's rational or that it ever has been in crypto, but it is. What you're saying makes sense from a fundamental standpoint. I wonder if that's kind of the reality right now, or if there's an element where you can't really tell because so many major players.
I'll give you my take on why atoms are valuable right now. I think atoms are valuable right now because they have the right seed distribution for a permissionless system like this. One of the things that is incredibly tough as a system developer here now is we were lucky when we launched the Cosmos Hub in many ways because crypto assets weren't an investment class the way they are today. It is easy to raise lots of money still, but it is hard to get a good distribution of people who are sort of passionate missionaries for your protocol, for your ideas, who are going to be collaborators with you over the long run. It was possible to do that. You can argue about whether or not Ethereum did a good job, but like early days of Bitcoin, look at how many Bitcoin developers from like 2011, 2012, 2013 are still working on the project. Ethereum has struggled with incentives, but has had a number of long-term committed people. I think the Atom community is really committed to this coordination mechanism, to managing the system, to investing. The amount of work that they all put in is just extraordinary. And
I would, I agree with you for starters, and I would take it a step further. I wonder if because Ethereum had already proven the concept, and you came in under the wire before things went really batshit crazy in 2017, if you were in like this perfect Goldilocks zone where you had enough stakeholders that could be ideological versus just speculative about it. Because even like the Ethereum crowd sale, it was, this kid's fucking smart. Like, let's put money.
Yeah, and there was a marketing effort there that we did not do.
Exactly.
We just...
So you were able to find like the organic believers that had already had relationships with you and Jay Kwan and other folks on the team. And leverage that in a way that I do buy that narrative and kind of reason that the project is valuable. We're gonna probably agree on the potential value of atoms, but I think the in general the market's still a bit silly. But particularly for a project that is not aiming to create a monetary asset, right? It seems like there's a bit of a disconnect until we start to see more like product market fit on chain.
I think there's an interesting question about whether or not the Cosmos Hub could create a money asset. I think the big question is, can a chain with on-chain governance create a money asset? And I think just we're a month into the experiment of the Cosmos Hub's governance actually being able to set things like inflation. And nothing's happened yet.
Yep.
But if that experiment works out, perhaps the Cosmos Hub governance will find its way to, either using atoms or some derivative asset of atoms as a unit of exchange. So that possibility exists. I'm simply saying that it doesn't, and maybe there's a value of pricing. I think the biggest thing that we have going for it is we have it is a great collaborative environment between a group of basically functionally people, of thousands of people all over the world.
Well, we don't need to get too far into the investing weeds. There's so much more interesting that's happening with the ecosystem. So let's talk about another kind of fascinating component of launch where you're kind of doing a redux. I remember you talking about Game of Stakes in October of 2017. So here's a fun fact. I met Zaki at Mellon's conference in October of 2017. And I believe it may have even been during your presentation that I had the epiphany for what I wanted to build with Messari. Yeah. Because I didn't watch it. I ran into the other room and I was furiously scribbling on a napkin. But at the time you were talking about this Game of Stakes, which is basically how you would do the make the testnet a bit fun, an adversary, create an adversarial environment, stress test some of the assumptions that were kind of pre-launch. Let's talk a little bit about that, and then this new Game of Zones, which is kind of the redux of that in terms of what comes next.
So a big part of what my role in 2018 was creating this validator marketplace. Did not exist. No validators existed. And that was one of our big worries about launching the system was who is actually going to run this? Are they going to keep their computers on? All of these questions. Yep. And we organically built a community. People started businesses, Bison Trails, Figment, networks all got started in sort of our validator chat rooms. And we wanted to, we sort of came up with this idea that was extremely difficult to execute, which of doing an incentivized testnet. And it's fascinating to see, a dozen projects now, if not more, launching incentivized testnets now, largely inspired by our work on Game of Stakes. A lot of them seem to be repeating mistakes that we made. Including not really knowing when your software is ready for something like this and kind of dragging your community along. It's kind of interesting though, it's just it's a little bit like the Goldilocks of the token issuance. It was easier the first time you do it. Now everybody's doing it, and how do you compete? But with the launch of IBC, we're trying to take some of our own internal learning about what was successful with Game of Stakes, which was it really taught a group of people how to operate the software. Not just operate the software when everything is fine, but operate the software when there is a massive amount of spam on the network, people are actively trying to knock you off, et cetera. And it was just amazing to see the network keep chugging along under really horrible circumstances. There was this massive Sybil attack. There were all kinds of things that will never happen on the Cosmos Hub in all likelihood that we got to experience, and the group of people who now operate the Cosmos Hub got to experience through Game of Zones. And so our big goal is with IBC, the same thing will happen. We need a community of operators. It is not simply enough to have a protocol. There must be a community of people who are now familiar with this protocol, who know how the software works, can debug it, can fix problems when they happen, can make improvements, et cetera. And it was really successful for us to do Game of Stakes, and that produced a community for the consensus. We want to do the same thing for the interblockchain community.
So there's two maybe other main areas that we should talk about. They relate to, on the one hand, your relationship to Polkadot and ETH 2.0 in particular. And this is kind of a good segue from what we were just talking about with Game of Stakes and how do you kind of incentivize people and actually stress test this proof of stake system with validators, in the wild, where you have a head start, but now you have some other teams that maybe maybe a little bit more adversarial than we've talked about so far in this conversation, especially if you read Gavin's end of year CoinDesk piece about the coming blockchain wars. And then the other, which it seems like it might be somewhat similar, is the relationship with Binance, because they're the 800-pound gorilla in the centralized exchange space and the ecosystem in general, but certainly have indicated their interest in ultimately moving most of their systems into a decentralized on-chain environment. So, which one is going to be the better segue? Which one should we cover first? The coming wars, or
I have opinions on both. So we could start with the blockchain wars.
Okay.
I was much more, if you'd asked me sort of December 2018, whether or not blockchain wars were going to be a thing in 2019, I would have kind of been like, yeah, like I can think of all of this crazy shit that you can do. You can have you can build a Cosmos zone that incentivizes people to produce long Bitcoin forks. You can do the same thing for Ethereum. There is all of this surface area to attack. I kind of, in 2020, don't really care about any of that anymore.
Is it just like battle fatigue?
No, it's like our goal should be, as a community, should be 10xing the user growth, or 100xing users, developers, all of this stuff. I think a lot about how we've not really broken through to mainstream developers around programmable money. And if we haven't done that, what is the point of all of this? And I think with Cosmos, we have a bunch of useful technical assets there. So I kind of want to focus on that battle, the adoption battle. And I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about, whether or not Polkadot is better than Cosmos, or, how the trade-offs between Substrate or their consensus algorithm and our consensus algorithm. I kind of look at what they're doing. I check in periodically. We talk to their team. It may be a great capability to offer for expanding the developer community. For instance, to be able to tell people, if you like Go, you can build stuff in Cosmos on the Cosmos SDK. And if you like Rust, you can build stuff on Substrate that connects into Cosmos. It might be a great story. So, we have people looking into this question of how to do interop across all of these things. But I think one of the unique advantages that we have is, while many other projects are going to be spending 2020 getting their mainnets out, all I want to spend 2020 on is figuring out how do I get 10 million developers building blockchains. And it doesn't have to even be our blockchain. I don't really, the victory condition is number of people.
You'll have to indulge me though. What are your thoughts on ETH 2.0 in particular? We know that Polkadot is going to probably launch this year. But ETH 2 is maybe the most hyped but ambiguous project in the ecosystem. And I've said publicly, I don't even think that you need ETH 2 to scale Ethereum if it becomes just like the DeFi chain. It's very, very different from I think the Internet of Blockchain comparison. But I do view ETH 2 with all of its shards as essentially a version of the hub and zone model, right?
So I tend to view Ethereum 2.0 as kind of, as it has evolved, it has become more and more and more like Cosmos, which is fine.
Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
Yeah. The other aspect of it, though, is that it is, I think the most interesting thing about ETH 2.0 is the way in which they have built the system. Cosmos, we have a lot of contributors, we have a lot of people building zones, etc. But there's a lot of the core technology still, the engineering and the know-how still resides within, a close set of people who've collaborated on this project and Ethereum 2.0 is really trying to distribute the knowledge of how the system works by hiring all these diverse teams who will evolve over time. Many of them will never ship a working client, but they'll have internalized a lot of expertise on the system, and that could be really exciting if this social experiment actually succeeds. But one of the things that has been so disappointing to me is really neither the ETH 2.0 strategy nor like the converse to the ETH 2.0 strategy, which is build a Silicon Valley style startup, seems to be doing as good a job as I would have hoped on actually building next generation systems. Cosmos is really ideas from 2014. And it's sort of, there are things in the Cosmos ecosystem, like a project that I will just call out called Lazy Ledger, which is sort of extending the direction in way of Tendermint and the architecture around Tendermint in ways that potentially eliminate the need for architecture, like a sharded architecture. These sharded architecture ideas are really 2016 era ideas, and not a single project has delivered on any of those ideas that were around when Cosmos started working on this stuff. I kind of thought that we would have at least a year to 2 year head start on anyone shipping sharding when we started in Cosmos. And even though we were a year late, we're still 2 years ahead of anyone shipping sharding.
Maybe 3 years, like the time frame.
And it may be that something like Lazy Ledger comes out of the Cosmos ecosystem and just eliminates the need or the desire for anything like sharding. I think that's the biggest thing is the blockchain research side has moved enormously fast. We haven't pulled in very many of those ideas into Cosmos. We've had the opportunity to kind of see it all evolve. A lot of these other projects have been sort of chasing that moving research frontier, which is a really frustrating place to be. And I'm excited about all those projects, happy to contribute to all of them. Think as those systems mature, they could all find a really useful place in sort of the overall Cosmos architecture. But I also think people should be, I would say, like, as a person who spends a lot of time in the research community, I've looked at and I'm starting to see things come out of the research world and to the practical application world that make me really excited and aren't sharding.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. One trade-off, or at least an alleged trade-off that I've heard is, Ethereum is focused on censorship-resistant, unseizable, more distributed applications, and your bias would go more towards security. Is that fair to think about the censorship resistance of Cosmos being a little bit less of a focus?
It's unclear how censorship resistant Cosmos is, to be honest. It is untested.
Yeah.
It could be quite bad. IBC should help a lot because you should be able to move your asset to a place where you're not going to be censored, but it may not be great. And that may be our downfall. That may be where where the architecture doesn't, and something more like what ETH 2.0 is trying to build really shines. And so that possibility exists. We have optimized for modularity, scalability, simplicity, or like sort of social scalability in like the Bitcoiner sense, over like sort of censorship resistance and technical scalability.
Yep.
And those trade-offs may or may not end up making any sense.
Fair enough. Certainly one of the risks to monitor, but you guys are on top of it. So I guess we'll wrap up with the project that is closest to product market fit in your realm, which is Binance and the Binance DEX, which migrated over. Before I get into Binance, one small bit. We talked about Binance and we talked about Aragon. On the other hand, we did see that Tron acquired DLive, which was another Cosmos project. Have they moved off of Cosmos, or is that just the intention with this acquisition?
I didn't check. So last time I checked into the team, it's like imminent. I know that is the plan.
Okay. What does that change the calculus at all in terms of how you think about community building, where you can literally have teams and projects that just market the shit out of their monetary premium and seniorage capabilities, and they just use that capital to buy up projects that have some utility? Because I'm gonna get hell for this on Twitter when this goes live, but say what you will about Tron, They've got Steem, they've got DLive, which are two of the more actively used crypto protocols. They just bought Polo or had a hand in it, and of course they purchased BitTorrent. So that there's no signs of that abating. I almost wonder if it's like if Tron's like fake it till you make it coin, right?
Well,
and if that poses a threat, as soon as a more community-oriented system like Cosmos gets a team that is actually building something with utility, if that can just basically be purchased by a monetary asset.
So what I think is like one of the bigger, so I don't know exactly the calculus of the DLive team, but I have been seeing in our ecosystem, we've talked, for a long time we were sort of, the token economy was really struggling with the scalability issues of bringing any sort of consumer decentralized application. And we have, through sort of building Tendermint and Cosmos, kind of built a system that can deliver experiences to tens or hundreds of thousands of users where there is a blockchain component, if not sort of as like some piece of it. And like the transaction volumes on the DLive blockchain were phenomenal. But you really run into a problem when you kind of want to go to market in North America, which is there is no clarity on how you can, from a regulatory point of view, bring a useful token-powered application on a blockchain to market in North America. And that's this is where I live, and it's a real struggle for all of these teams to kind of build build any success. So at that point, you kind of go to Asia. And you look to Asia as a place where these token-powered economies, where like a token-powered application actually could potentially get user growth. And there, you're in an ecosystem where Binance is very strong, Tron is very strong, and I think teams and founders are going to have to make a decision. And I think Cosmos is going to have to make a decision. What is it that we want to, where do we want to focus? Where do we want to build? Do we want to go and play in this environment that, in this sort of more token friendly economy in Asia? We have deep connections in Korea, et cetera. There are possibilities there. There are several exchanges falling after Binance building Cosmos chains. Or do we want to look at another market? And that's a thing I spend a lot of time thinking about right now.
Yep.
So I think the net of why DLive ended up going is they were happy. They were happy with the technology. They were happy with their user growth. But as a practical matter, they need to be able to onboard, offboard, have liquidity for tokens, et cetera, in order for any of this to make any sense. Yep. And you can't do that in North America today.
Yep. I certainly buy that, and it kind of brings us to the last question on the relationship with Binance, right? Because it's got to be the largest zone in the Cosmos network.
In terms of users, I actually think Terra, which is a stable coin in South Korea, actually has more active accounts. Like they have like 900,000 active accounts on their blockchain. Now, whether or not that translates into users, there's a whole bunch of questions about economics, but we have a couple of big ones.
Binance definitely being one of the top, one of the largest. And so DLive is an example of a smaller application that is basically incentivized to go with a larger project like Tron, which is top 10 in terms of market capitalization and liquidity. Binance is liquidity, right?
Yes.
Is there a scenario where Binance does something that's slightly different, where they either just can they ultimately like subsume the hub? I guess is the question, right? If their zone gets big enough, do they become the hub, and does Cosmos hub become the zone?
I fully agree with all of this. What I would say is I don't imagine that Binance will ever be the experiment in permissionlessness that the hub is. Now, the question that is harder is, does permissionlessness have product market fit?
Yes.
But Binance will not compete in that experiment. Binance is simply saying, we are building a far more centralized, far more controlled system that allows for non-custodial trading. I think they will adopt IBC simply because it gives them permissionless extensibility and scaling, which they need. It will be good for their users and for DeFi. And I think, our relationship at that level continues to be good. I think it will provide an enormous reason to build in the Cosmos ecosystem because it will give you access to that liquidity, which no other DEX will be able to compete with. Yep. But the question for Cosmos is, can permissionlessness find product market fit? And I think that is an entirely orthogonal experiment to what Binance does on their side.
And at a more meta level, does any of this even matter?
Yes.
Because if you take away permissionlessness, like you're talking about centralized distributed.
What I love about Binance though is Binance is the dream that like Jay, Ethan, and I had when we started Cosmos in so many ways. Yep. Because there is no company, there is just a Cosmos chain. There is just Tendermint holding the primary assets of a distributed business network. Yep. And that's it. And that's mind-blowing. Mm-hmm. And that it happened in the first year that we were live, like, it's so exciting and so satisfying. Like, I wish, I to a certain extent, I wish I had the balls to do what CZ is doing. Yeah.
We live in the great state of the great nation of the U.S.
But yeah, so I think it's like I think it is a quite beautiful thing. Binance really does represent the vision of Cosmos in some form. Mm-hmm. I would hope that there is a future in which there are thousands and thousands of Binance-like things where where the company is primarily embodied by openly verifiable Cosmos blockchain.
Zaki, where can people get involved and follow you and the project?
At ZManian on Twitter, at Cosmos on Twitter. Those are great places. We pretty much tweet everything out. We have weekly IBC calls. Our GitHub is very active. The Cosmos forums is very active. The Telegram is kind of a nightmare, but it exists. There's just all, and Cosmos.network is kind of like the landing point for all of this.
Well, we'll link to all this in the show notes and make sure that if there's any more jargony components, we'll have call outs for additional resources as well, so people don't feel totally lost if they want to learn more. But it's been great having you. It's great to see you again. And hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, be good. Peace.